the AtlanTec Festival 2021 and to this session with Kristina Podnar on the power of digital policy. We are back again for our 7th year and we are running a packed event across 5 days with 40 sessions, over 50 speakers, and we're going to kick things off here with a quick introductory video of what you can expect for this year's AtlanTec Festival. Okay, great. And to those who've just joined, you're very welcome to the AtlanTec Festival 2021. We would love for you all to participate today by following us on Twitter at AtlanTecFest and using the hashtag AtlanTec. Here at ITAG and at AtlanTec, we're all about of what's interest to our tech community of innovators and practitioners along Ireland's western seaboard, which is what we call locally here at the AtlanTec Gateway. These events are supported by the tech community and enable the sharing of expertise and knowledge. And feel free to let us know in the chat or the Q&A what topics are of special interest to you. Also, if you'd like to let us know where you're joining from, you can let us know in the chat there on your Cisco WebEx. So there should be a chat option. I'm always interested to know where people are from. One of the benefits of going virtual is that, there's no restrictions in terms of who can join from what location. So I myself am based in Galway City there, as you can see in the picture in the background. I'm originally from County Mayo, but I am coming from Galway today. So I can already see a couple of people joining. Donegal, Letterkenny, you're very welcome. It's good to have a community from different locations with us today. So just a quick introduction in case I haven't had the opportunity to meet you yet. My name is Lauren S. Smith and I work as a solutions engineer in Diligent. And Diligent provide modern government software solutions to companies globally, and they recently chose Galway as their EMEA headquarters. We've hired 150 out of our 200 goal in the past 6 months, and that's just another testament to the top talent that we have here in Galway City. The fact that Diligent chose Galway for that EMEA headquarters is just fantastic. I'm delighted to be here as your event moderator today. I had the opportunity to do this last year as well, and it's just such a fun, exciting event to be a part of, and we always learn so much throughout the week. When it comes to tracking questions for the actual Q&A, we will take those in the Q&A section of your Cisco WebEx, so appreciate if you could put them in there. And the session is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch these back after the conference. You should also have the ability to toggle on and off subtitles using the closed captions option in the Cisco WebEx. Now, in a moment, we will hear from Kristina Podnar about driving innovation through digital policy. But first, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our sponsors for making this fantastic event happen and for allowing us to offer this event free to this digital community here in Galway City. Okay, so just a big shout out. We couldn't have done this without all of our sponsors, and you'll see there VistaTech, one of our main sponsors. So appreciate everyone who supported the conference and supported us for this week of expertise sharing. Okay, so without further ado, I am going to introduce today's speaker, and thank you for everyone who's just joined as well. We're about to kick off. So let me just get myself organized here, and we will hear from Kristina. So if you can let me know in the chat that the share comes through okay, just to make sure I'm not talking to a blank screen.
You're looking great.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kristina. I appreciate that. All right, so think of Kristina as your digital policy Sherpa. She's been in the trenches for over 20 years, guiding organizations through complex digital operations. Kristina creates frameworks that help digital teams innovate and create while ensuring that they don't take on unnecessary internal disarray and face stiff penalties or lawsuits, sometimes both, for ignoring regulations that they don't even know exist. Kristina is the author of The Power of Digital Policy. She is a TEDx speaker and an advisor for various associations, including the XRSI. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Kristina.
Thanks so much, Lorna, for that kind introduction. And I'm so excited to be with you here today. Thank you for having me, and we're going to have a great time, I promise. As we're looking at the screen, I bet that all of you have a history that mirrors this timeline. For me, it started in 1998. I was working at a web design agency, creating websites primarily for nonprofits. We were unique in this space, sort of operating at a very exciting time, kind of like today, when the internet was just taking off in the mainstream business world. Because it was such early days, innovation was everywhere, and there were no rules, if you remember that. Sort of feels like today, but not as structured. In those times, we created anything that seemed exciting and new. Anything that would put our clients on the map was really rewarded. I was a lonely project manager, as we say, and I had many different hats in my wardrobe and switched them out as needed, often multiple times a day. My role was similar to that of what we now think back of as a webmaster, if you're old enough to know what a webmaster was. And not only did I collaborate with clients to structure their projects, I also worked with designers, creating graphics in Photoshop. I wrote HTML. I tested website functionality, wrote some CGI scripts. And I did a lot of things, including the all-important ability to make donations or pledges for these nonprofits. And I also transferred files to the web server via FTP. It was sort of this heady time. I was creating and redesigning websites for well-known organizations like the International Committee of the Red Cross, UNICEF, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, the International Wildlife Fund Relief, and others. Not only was the web a free-for-all creativity, limited only by what we could think up, sound familiar probably, right? But it was also a time where management and most clients knew little about it. They were delighted by pretty designs and the opportunity to raise awareness and funds via this new communication channel. It was really great. But the laissez-faire attitude of the times resulted in many fiascos. You probably remember a lot of them like you're seeing on the screen. In hindsight, they might appear humorous until you grasp how immense the consequences could have been. In fact, I remember this one Saturday where, I actually had to make a website go live. And the client was without a website for 6 hours while I frantically worked to recreate the files because I didn't create a backup before I started. To this day, I don't think they knew. It's probably good because I didn't lose my job. But there's always this, what could have happened in the back of my mind? While this may seem shocking today, we had no backup strategy. Server passwords were shared every Monday at a meeting so that we could all access servers and client files as needed. We sent client payment card numbers to the bank with no encryption whatsoever, and we never gave it a second thought. A lot kind of like we do today, but with artificial intelligence or perhaps some chatbots. Today, of course, the kind of behavior that we had in the late 1990s would be really kind of grounds for dismissal. And we would likely have some kind of a closed door session with either our manager or maybe the legal team. But such hyper awareness gives the impression that we've matured a lot more than we really have in practice. While it may seem that we've come a long way, the reality is equivalent behavior, and worse even today, is still happening with far worse consequences than 2 decades ago. I personally blame it on the breathtaking speed of the digital revolution and the disruption it's caused. Nobody wanted to be left behind, so we all took this do the best we can now and we'll get out to the results later approach. But it just kind of didn't sink in, I think, for a lot of us that later would be 25 or 30 years away. So here we are, 2021. Not only have we been down this bumpy road, in addition to being somewhat passive about responsible digital management, we're also now living in a time of a significant disruption, and we all have to transform fast. What's interesting is we have to do that without making blunders, and that's really the catch. Lorna, can you go to the next slide, please? Despite the ubiquitous news stories about data breaches that we hear every day, or the embarrassing aftermaths of corporate social media gaffes, very few organizations today actually weigh their digital activity in the context of risks and opportunities. They tend to put associated policies in place to support their online operations. But really, a lot of ignorance is out there, mostly out of good intentions, right? We're not weighing the opportunities and the risks that come with digital. And that's really where digital policies come in. I like to term the digital policies as guardrails, if you will. They keep us safe on the superhighway, driving as fast as we can or we want to, innovative, free to create new things. But unfortunately, the reality is that most businesses either have few policies or none at all. If you're lucky, your organization has some policy and branding guidelines, but digital activity is being carried out with minimal consideration for legal and regulatory requirements, or for the risks and opportunities that are inherent in the online activities. Whether it's a website or social media accounts, mobile applications, customer relationship management tools, email marketing platforms, AI, chatbots, or any other type of digital presence, the vast majority of organizations are still winging it. In fact, what I see is from the 1990s, the only thing that's changed is we went from no policies to many written documents. But those documents tend to be PDFs that are stored somewhere on an intranet where nobody really visits them. They tend to be numerous, so numerous that nobody really cares to read through 100 and some odd pages just to quickly get to an answer they need right away for that next marketing campaign. And at the end of the day, everything is still in disarray, very much like it was in the early and late 1990s. What's happened is that digital has moved on. We're now being pressed to transform even faster. And yet what we haven't done is paid attention to the people working in digital. We haven't paid attention to you and to me and how we get the job of digital done. Usually we're looking at all of these PDFs that I like to term as shelfware because they sit on a shelf on the intranet until somebody comes along to look at them. Usually it's the legal team or compliance team, but very few people are really taking advantage of these stale documents because they're not user-friendly. They don't help us get the job done fast, and they're usually scattered all over the place. So what's worse than having no policies is having a slew of them written in long legalese terms, saved as PDFs on the internet, although I'm sure none of you have those. We're sort of that legal or compliance department nobody will ever visit. We've all but guaranteed analysis paralysis, which is a shame because we're at a point we must transform our organizations fast, and the last thing we want to do is continually go back and ask permission to redo the things we've always done or previously done, thus slowing down the process. I've personally spent over 2 decades of my career in this space doing research, trying to enable digital teams to do their jobs easier, faster. What's more interesting, though, is I've tried to actually create a space where we can have lots of freedom within a framework. We can actually do things in an innovative way without a lot of constraints, in a way that's predictable for the business, and where people know that we'll be doing things that are safe, but also that are going to be pushing the boundaries in the direction we need them to in order to have the business grow and profit. After all, that's what digital is all about, right? So let's take a look at what that might look like in what I call an organization that has a digital policy program. So Lorna, let's head to the next slide and take a look. Interestingly enough, as organizations undertake digital transformation, They're finding out that digital workers can work faster, more efficiently, with increased opportunity for innovation and creativity, if only they're presented with the freedom that a framework provides. And that framework comes from having a set of right-sized, focus on the right-sized set of digital policies. Policies, as I mentioned, are guardrails that allow you digital teams to drive fast, shift gears as necessary or as they want to, but have the protection from going over that proverbial cliff. Digital policies are the antidote to the things that can go wrong when organizations make up rules as they go along. They're the rule book for your business's online activity. They describe what you will and you won't do. But they can't just be written, like I said, as shelfware. That's a recipe for the disaster. They must be programmatically brought to life. Mature organizations call that their digital policy program, and here's what it entails, as you can see on the screen. We have the digital policy steward, who's the individual chosen by the leadership to own every aspect of digital policy and the program itself. The role includes things like identifying policy gaps, enlisting the help of people who know how to close those gaps, implementing the policies, right? So not just writing them and putting them someplace, but actually implementing them, doing change management, and setting a review schedule that ensures they will meet the organization needs. In other words, policies are living, breathing things that we have to manage and maintain, because guess what? Digital isn't static, it's constantly changing as well. So the digital steward delegates most of the nitty-gritty work to these digital authors or subject matter experts from the various functional areas. I don't think we have many small businesses in the audience today, but in a small business, a single person might typically play both of these roles. In large organizations, I tend to see a steward, and I tend to see lots of authors because there's so much diversity and subject matter expertise in what individuals know. For some companies, the digital steward also plays the role of digital author, like I said, but it might be slightly different. They might actually be outsourcing the pen to paper writing, or they might be talking to subject matter experts and actually writing that information down themselves. Those are the details that we aren't going to focus on today because it's the nitty-gritty, and that's sort of the easy part. The harder part is really making sure that you have the roles defined. And in that sense, think of the digital steward as a general contractor. They're sort of that general contractor of the digital policy program. Policy authors are the individual contractors who bring specific skills to the table. They're the plumbers, the drywall workers, the roofers. In the digital world, they're the ones who determine the organization's position on the policies that affect their slice of the organizational pie. In some situations, they can make the decision unilaterally. In others, they may need to consult with other SMEs, other areas, executive level, perhaps approval is necessary of the recommendations. And so there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of conversation. But the key is, in order to get this functional digital program in place and for the policy steward to do their job, they actually have to gather information, right? They have to actually understand what is their stance on something like accessibility. What do we think about data breach? How important is our brand in various local markets, right? So really gathering information and understanding what is our stance on particular topics. Then they have to actually document the policy, again, working with the author. That is where most people stop. They go, oh, we've written the policy, it's kind of out there, everybody should follow it. But that's really where the job of the steward starts. They actually have to maintain and measure the policies, both for adherence, but also for effectiveness and alignment with not just the legal and regulatory practices, but the ever-emerging industry best practices and a lot of the innovation we see. Because it's not just about legal and regulatory. If it was, we would just not do digital, right? We would all just kind of hang out and not do digital, and we'd be as safe as we could possibly be. But that's not our reality. If you don't have a digital presence, if you're not leveraging digital for your organization, you're not going to succeed. So digital policy steward has to make this program work. And what's more important, they have to create a repository that is more than a sheer SharePoint site on the intranet. If you think that this is a heavy lift that can't be undertaken, because I do hear that a lot, Let me say that in my experience, which if you can't tell, lots of gray hairs, it's not an impossible feat. For example, if an organization is just starting out in digital policy, then the list of policies you're seeing at the bottom of your screen is what would be a realistic goal. A far more mature organization will, of course, have many more policies. And the gold standard of a highly mature organization will have yet multiple more policies. But the idea is to start plugging the holes on the ship right now and make sure that we can actually evolve and grow and create that freedom that I've talked about, that ability to create, that ability to innovate without having to always go back and ask, may I do this repeatedly? Or without having to slow down the bus or worry that we're going to do something really, really bad, which is really where most organizations fail because they don't enable this critical governance function, and they instead allow digital workers to sort of just wing it, right? Pass up opportunities and take on risks that are unnecessary. What's worse, the organizations don't actually take advantage of the opportunity. It's amazing to me always, and we'll talk about this through 3 case studies today, how policies can actually drive innovation, how much benefit there is for the organization. And that means that these things we've always thought about as dull and boring and binding are actually things that create opportunity. Opportunity for us as individual workers, but also opportunities for the organization. And so that's what we're going to examine for the rest of our time together today. We'll look at 3 different organizations and how they've used the power of digital policy to successfully drive their digital transformation. I'll touch upon the legal and the regulatory aspect, but I'm far more concerned, and I'll touch upon more about their own unique business drivers, how they've actually benefit from creating a digital policy program to enable their organization. So before we jump in though, let me pause for a moment and answer any questions that you have just about policy, or if you want to give us a shout out in the comments section around a crazy story maybe that you have, or if you don't think you have any policies, feel free to kind of include that. Or if you think you're the gold standard, challenge me, because a company did about 2 years ago, and they said they were the gold standard. All they wanted was a stamp of approval. But I went in there and I found a whole area where they were not working properly. So if you think you're the gold standard, feel free to share that with the community. But otherwise, happy to answer any questions or just hear a shout out.
Great, Kristina. Yeah, appreciate the pause there just to give everyone an opportunity to digest everything you shared. There's some really, really great information here about digital policies, regardless of whether you're starting on your journey or you would consider yourself quite mature when it comes to understanding digital policies. The information here is really relatable and also actionable, so appreciate that. And just what I'm thinking there, again, as Kristina mentioned, if anyone wants to contribute in the chat or the Q&A, please do. In Ireland today, Kristina, we actually had a recent attack on our health services, the HSE. So it was a malware attack. And I think, you know, they really should have had more stronger digital policies in place around their data breaches, because what's happened, unfortunately, is that they've just cancelled appointments all over the country for outpatients. So scans, appointments, you know, a lot of various, I guess, pieces or areas in the hospitals are now just shut down for a number of days. And I'm not sure, hopefully it won't be too much longer, but it seems to me that they didn't have a policy for, you know, their entire IT system getting hacked. So yeah, just a good example that we're all living through here in Ireland today. I just thought I'd mention it.
And Lorna, that's a great point, because we just had that happen, or something very similar happen, if you heard, on the other side of AtlanTec, right? We went through the Colonial Pipeline here in the United States where you know, we had a ransomware situation and oil was not flowing through, so we had a shortage of gas. And you know, digital policies are interesting because people say, will I be completely protected? Will I be in a bubble? Will you make me immune to everything? And in some instances, like ransomware or breaches, chances are you're not going to be ever 100% protected. But what policies will do for the organization is make sure that if something does happen, right, first of all, the idea is let's protect you. Let's put you in that bubble. But if somehow the bubble is, you know, experiencing a slight little puncture and the air is about to deflate the bubble, how do we react really quickly? so we minimize the damage. And I've lived through quite a few of these breaches with clients over the last 4.5, 5 years. And what I've seen is that they recover quickly. And it's interesting because we saw that with the Colonial Pipeline, where they did have good policies in place. They did actually have a breach. It wasn't preventable, apparently, or it would have been, I guess, if they were 100% protected. But there was that little nuance that allowed the attack to occur. And the really great thing is that they practiced what they were putting and preaching in their policies, and they alerted the authorities. They started to act very swiftly, which minimized the damage. And so I think the entire ransomware took about maybe 36 hours to figure out, which is very, very little considering the possible sort of negative consequences. So again, protect idea, not just about breaches, but about brand loss, etc. But also make sure that you're able to respond quickly and swiftly if you need to, whether it's a hack or it's an accessibility lawsuit, or perhaps it's just users abandoning your brand because of somebody else that's come up in the marketplace and they're moving faster, swifter, easier.
Yeah, great points. It's not about what could possibly happen, because unfortunately we can't plan for every eventuality or every type of attack, but what we can plan for is the action we take if that attack happens. Yeah, absolutely. Okay,
Exactly.
Kristina, I think we will continue on then. I'm not seeing anything here in the chat, so yeah, I will
Great.
move on to our next section of your use cases or case studies.
Thanks. Well, this is the part that I'm really excited to share with everybody. Our first case study is one from a multinational technology company. About 2 years ago, I started working with this organization. They have a bit over 100,000 employees around the world, lots of consumers, partners in nearly every country. And for some time now, they've been seeing a decline in revenues, an increase in competition, especially from Asian companies. One of the biggest issues the company faced was a predictable slowness, right? Very, very large organizations tend to kind of slow down over time. And being such a large multinational, it took days to respond to a prospect, upwards of 3 days to, kind of get a new pricing quote on a product rollout. And that's because everything was always driven from headquarters and then localized to our regional or a country need. In theory, it sounded good, but the many decades of headquarters-driven development, whether of products or sales programs or marketing campaigns, drove this culture of not invented here mentality, which was part of the struggle of the company. So the leadership recognized that a change wasn't enough. It wasn't, just a little bit of a switch. We really had to transform. And so if we take a look at some of the solutions they considered and what they were really gunning for here is, it would be kind of like adding a sail on an ocean freighter is what they told me, right? It would have, like, in a little bit of a change, they would have gone a bit faster, but couldn't turn easier. And at the end of the day, they still would have been a freighter. So the leadership chose to be a highly aggressive organization and change the governance of the company to truly support a decentralized model that allows local market general managers autonomy and staff to sort of independently work and create, both in terms of products and services, but also in terms of marketing, right? So lots of decentralization. The executives mapped out a plan for a 20% or more increase in local market outreach and a freeze to the sharp decline in sales so that they eventually could increase, right? The idea first was stop the bleeding, right? And then we'll actually start to rehab and get to whole again. So as lovely as the goal sounded, they meant nothing without making an overall plan, obviously. And the plan has to really be put into operations because that's where the rubber meets the road, as we like to say. So in other words, this was going to be a transformation. And to support this transformation, we had to develop a number of digital policies. They included things like technology acquisition and use. If you think of such a large organization, right, a lot of technology tends to be centralized. And the organization wanted agility and freedom to respond to local needs of consumers, but what it didn't want was the chaos that comes with each country entity buying its own technology, especially where data collection is concerned. Think about the MarTech stack, for example. Because of the company's services and the fact that they're doing a lot of B2B globally, central data means a lot. So in the interest of efficiency and the ability to deliver a streamlined user experience, key technologies that are common to all markets and that are centralized were the things that we made at the center of the policy. The policy is clear about what must be used. In this specific company's instance, it's a Salesforce Marketing Cloud, but it's not the case for every delivery of every marketing campaign. Campaigns are completely localized by individual countries and by policies that they develop and put into place. And what they can do is have oversight and approval with the local country general manager. This allows the company to not just gain insights from local markets, but also determine who needs to sign off in an agile way. So we're not always dealing with like, oh, is this logo exactly where it's supposed to be? Is this exactly the color that it has to be? You know, if the color isn't working for the country, if the logo needs to go elsewhere because we're partnering with a local market company, we can actually adapt for that. We have that outlined. We don't have to always go back to corporate headquarters and ask for permission or approval, which is really great and makes this company move really, really fast. In addition, content translation and localization was something that they always centralized because they thought, oh, we can gain efficiencies, which is true. But what it took away was this really quick turnaround time, and the ability to centralize translation just isn't worth the headache sometimes to local markets. So that too, we decided to decentralize, but again, within a little bit of a safety net, meaning that every market can choose to translate their own content. What they have to share are their translation memories. So everybody gets to benefit from that. And local markets that do speak languages, the same languages, or that do share the same regulatory frameworks can also share and partner with each other, but it's a choice rather than something that we're pushing at them. So a lot of times people stop me here and they say, but like, wait, that isn't always the most efficient way to do things. And the answer is, you're right. Sometimes it's not the most efficient way of doing things. However, if you can take a little bit of an inefficiency at the local market level and gain agility in terms of turnaround and the ability to quote faster to consumers, get to them before competition, then that inefficiency up front pays off at the end. So the key is, how do you want to structure your program and how do you want to transform? And once you decide that, you really need to codify that in policies. A lot of work that we ended up doing with this company, for example, came across things like ability to understand where the discovery process is really upfront creative and how much of that can be used across the border. So we spent more time understanding where market similarities are or they're not. For example, India and Indonesia, they can actually share 60% of the creative upfront process and artifacts. But that doesn't hold true for countries like India and Italy, right? Different kinds of things resonate in those markets. So sometimes you can get efficiencies, and the best folks to understand those efficiencies are not sitting at headquarters. And that's what this organization understood. Where the opportunities do exist, the company has created a digital asset management that allows for repurposing of content. And it's never really mandated. Everybody can put things in, they get cleaned, and they're ready to share with other markets. We take a look at it from a copyright and trademark marketing perspective because, again, we need that for that legal protection, but everything else is up to local markets. So you might actually ask me why this is such a big deal. Well, as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the digital policy program, the company changed its what I call Mother May I outlook. Now, instead of always waiting for headquarters to provide information, the local markets can go to their customers and partners without asking for approval, right? That's a really big deal. And what I like to say is sharing is caring, and peer-to-peer networks are important. We've put in place ways for digital teams to collaborate, but what's in it for them is self-service. The more they collaborate, the more they benefit. Going it digital alone isn't always in the self-interest. And so we've left that up to the organizational components, and now all of a sudden they're more agile, they can move faster, we can collaborate. And what's fascinating is that these policies create enough of a framework that it's not chaotic. And that's the criticality for a lot of us as we're looking to transform the organization. And more recently, what I think is interesting since the pandemic started, the company has moved to an on-demand B2B pricing model. Before, there was a lot of policies and standards around price setting, currency translations, the need for kind of a going back and forth with headquarters. Definitely the finance office was involved a lot. But now we've put in place these digital policies and supporting technologies that allow for B2B pricing to be generated based on thousands of products and services sold and delivered. And because we have an AI infrastructure that was deployed, the company uses machine learning to develop on-demand quotes with 98% accuracy. So they're faster, they're more accurate, and what they're doing is starting to actually stop that bleed of the market share that they were losing for quite a few years. And in addition to using technology to drive product bids to clients, automated technology is used to piece together things like financial disclosure, perform currency translation, choose any kind of reserve for the local market individual as necessary, and also to provide partner discounting. It really is what I consider to be the epitome of digital transformation, because you have this behemoth of an organization that has gone to almost a little mini franchising where every individual salesperson can really get out there and do their own thing, knowing that they have the resources of the company behind them to drive things like agile quotes, on-demand proposal creation, automatic hedging. And really, at the end of the day, they have the opportunity to do things the way they have to do them to get business done. And that, to me, is really the power of digital policy, and it's the power of digital transformation. It's the ideal that we all strive for. Lorna, let's take a look maybe at another example as well, because this pattern I see everywhere. This next example is of a company that already had digital policies in place when I started to work with them. As you may know, if you're in the pharma or life sciences space, the company survives through policies, right? They're protecting personal healthcare information, sometimes not as well, as we heard from Lauren a few minutes ago. There are breaches, but really at the core, companies have to protect information, and in healthcare, it's essential. But as I was able to observe with this company, it was spending too much time getting content approved and published. First, the marketing department had to complete its checks and balances. Then legal and compliance took over with their own approval processes. The fact is that this company is in a regulated industry. It was part of the problem, but the approval process was still unsustainable. It took an equivalent of five full-time employees, an average of 21 days, to get a single piece of content approved. And that's probably okay if you have a new product coming down the pipeline, because you kind of know months or years in advance that it's going to be there. But what happens when you have something that's a little bit more urgent? So we came up with this ingenious solution. We decided to use a chatbot to streamline the content approval process. Well, chatbots have become ubiquitous in the customer-facing applications. Most of us have kind of that chatbot for customer service. This was the first time I'd seen a company use one for internal governance. But if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Although the most talked about benefits of chatbots revolve around customer service and sales, chatbots can also save time and money internally. They can reduce the number of customer service employees needed to handle inquiries. They can provide service around the clock to employees. They can guide to better purchase decisions. So basically, the executives of this company correctly concluded that they could realize the same benefits internally by giving the tools to employees that we give to customers. So if we look at some of the solution components where we were heading, really the idea was that we needed to have a methodological process when it came to teaching the chatbot what to do. We wanted to create an opportunity where the company is able to take all of the lessons learned and basically feed them into a chatbot for other purposes, namely content clearance, and modify them as necessary for digital governance. So to make this chatbot concept a reality, again, we went about creating a handful of digital policies before we unleashed it into the workforce. The first policy we put into place was chatbot use. This policy actually defines when is it appropriate to use a chatbot and when it should never be used. For example, the chatbot identifies things like brand, accessibility requirements, privacy, security, the need for cookies, channels that can or can't be used with different marketing campaigns, and really what's appropriate or not appropriate depending on the marketing solution. What's really great about it too is that when an employee actually comes in to use the chatbot, we know who the employee is because they're logged onto the network. So we know which part of the organization they belong to. We know whether they've had their budget approved for the campaign or not. We know in advance whether we need to flag procurement to tell procurement that there's going to be an agency involved in this campaign. We know the market it's going to be targeted at, and we can save all of that information. So every single time the marketer re-engages for a new campaign, they don't have to recreate the wheel. We remember everything from last time, we adapt it for the future, and we save time in creation. So what we did have to do though is to enable that is create a policy that addresses users from an omni-channel journey requirements perspective, which means that we had to build out logic and give considerations for users reaching out via different channels, not just things like websites or social media, but other areas as well. And so we created pre-clearance policies. We created a slew of other aspects, things like GDPR came into effect because most of you are probably concerned about privacy. We thought a lot about algorithms to determine the need to translate and localize content or where content can be reused. And what's fascinating is the employees of this healthcare company are now able to create kind of these crazy scenarios and run them past the chatbot, almost like a brainstorming session. So they can actually see what kind of checklist they get. If they want to amend the campaign because they want to get it out the door faster, can they make the process easier, smoother, faster? They can also pre-feed any agency they're working with the requirements. So by the time it comes to procurement, we're able to move faster and easier. To me, what's really fascinating though, is you take a healthcare company, you give them a chatbot, you take content that used to take 21 days to pre-clear, and now they're doing it in 3 days. And that again, may not seem like a really big deal in a condition where you have a product coming down the pipe that's predictable. But if you're in a pandemic like we've been in for the last year, having fast communications, having fast marketing opportunities, and taking that turnaround time from 21 to 3 days is something that you can't possibly recoup in a day. It's something that's going to give you a return on investment for years to come. And that's the power of digital policy, because you create a framework, you create technologies that help the organization transform, but you do it in a way that is still safe and that gives benefit, and that we have that framework so that we have freedom within the framework to do what we want. So moving on really quickly, because I want to make sure we get to all kinds of questions that everybody might have. Let's take a quick look at one last example here. This use case is an interesting one because the company's been around for hundreds of years, and they do a lot of use from customers. It's really an international testing and verification company. A few years ago, the company decided that they were doing great, but in order to kind of maintain their market dominance, they would have to do an aggressive growth over 3 years. The CEO basically said, look, we plan to rely on mostly B2B spaces, but we need to actually change how we deal with our partners in that B2B space and start going B2C on their behalf. So a complete disruption of the organization and a big transformation at the same time, especially because on my first day, I asked the organization if they could tell me the authoritative list of how many offices they had around the globe. And the answer is we can't. I went to procurement, I went to facilities, I went to the receptionist, I went to HR. Everybody had different disparate systems where they kept their data. And the same thing was actually true for consumers and partners. So there was a really big lift that had to be done. And we tried to do it without disrupting the day-to-day business. So the solution we came up with really was one where we would focus on data and data centralization. So Lorna, if you want to kind of just quickly pop up there, the solutions aspect, what we really kind of gave the or the oil to was connecting global data systems and keeping all of the front-end processes in place as they had been to date. The idea was continue business as usual while we completely transform the back end. And so we took the company's 100 data stores around the globe and really transformed them into a single data lake. We defined the single source of truth, which was really critical. But what came into play were policies and constraints, things like data localization. We couldn't take consumer data out of China or Russia and put it into this lake. So we had to do a lot of massaging of the data, a lot of de-identification, as we like to say. We had to think about how do we stand up new channels for reaching consumers where only B2B relationships existed in the past. And so from a policy perspective, we created things like new mobile applications. We created a lot of opportunity for a user-generated content environment. What was fascinating, though, is as we started the lift from the back end, we actually had to remember that there's going to be a front end. And the organization is now preparing for that. But what's critical is that all of these policies have been put into place. So as the business strategy shifts, the back end and the policies are going to be able to support that, because we looked at as far of a freedom reaching framework as we could, made it super broad, and created a platform where we have those UGC policies, we have the data localization policies, we built the single source of truth, we built the data lakes, and now as the company is experimenting and seeing what's going to work and not work, they're again free to innovate, free to create, but they also know that they're safe to do that and they're going to be efficient when the moment comes. So I know that I've spent a lot of time talking, and it only seems fair to turn it over to everybody else. So I also recognize that I ran through the 3 use cases rather quickly. If we go to the next slide, Lorna, please. I'll let everybody know that they can reach out to me, ask me additional questions, pop on over to my website and take a look at the use cases themselves if you'd like, or resources for policies, but I'm also happy to take on any comments or questions that we might have at this time.
Great. Thank you very much, Kristina, for that presentation and for sharing your thoughts and your experience with us. It's really valuable to hear, the experience you've had with those practical use cases. I think there was a lot of takeaways there for people, and I think use cases are a great way to learn. So appreciate you, spending the time putting them together based on work you've done. So looking at the Q&A, we do have some questions coming in.